Welcome back, USHAPers. Here is part 2. We're going to be digging into an overview of Thomas Jefferson's presidential administration. But before we can do that, we need to recap the first American party system. So see how well you can do here from memory without looking at your notes of the differences between these two parties. So please pause the video here and see what you can come up with. Okay, so hopefully you took some time to see what you could recall about these two major political parties. Something that always helps me is if I can just think about the people heading those parties, and if I can remember their beliefs on certain topics, then that gets me most of the way there. So if you can think about Alexander Hamilton's beliefs, especially his economic plan, you're probably 75% of the way there with the beliefs of the Federalist Party. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson. If you know some of his background, then you can get part of the way there as well. And so the big difference here is their interpretation of the Constitution, whether they want a strong or a weak central government, looking at economic issues, and where these groups are located. So remember that our Federalists are located for the most part in the Northeast. That's where our moneyed interests are, our elites, whereas our JDRs or our Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans are focused in the South and the West and are really espousing the ideas and concerns for the farmers. All right, let's get to the election of Jefferson because it is an unbelievable election. So you saw some of this in your activity last week about the kinds of quotes that were being printed about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it was, the gloves came off for sure. So we always think about our modern day elections being so nasty and insulting, and the election of 1800 could definitely compete with some of that, I believe. So Jefferson is going to become president, and he's going to clean house. So the Federalists are going to lose a great deal of power here. This is going to start many years of JDR control. So we'll see Thomas Jefferson, and then we will see James Madison, and then eventually we're going to end up in something called the era of good feelings, when we only have one political party. All right, so the election itself is a mess. So the way that the elections worked in the Electoral College is that each elector got 2 votes. And so they're both votes for president. And so whoever the runner-up was would become the VP. So you definitely have a potential for people of differing political parties being a team, and so that's not really going to be a recipe for stability. So this would be like if in 2016 Donald Trump became president and Hillary Clinton became VP. That's going to be a bit of a mess. So that's what we're talking about here. And the problem with the election of 1800 is that we have a tie. So we have a tie of 73 electoral votes between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. Adams is coming at a distant third there with 65 electoral votes. So no one has a majority. So we have to figure out what to do. It'd be a really good idea to review the Alien and Sedition Act issues from our lesson that we did last week on the 1790s. So definitely take a look at that. Keep in mind that actual overt campaigning is still frowned upon. At this point, it was seen as kind of dirty and uncouth. So it was done by proxy. So the person that was running wouldn't actually be making political speeches. It would be people connected to them. So it might be other Federalists making speeches on behalf of John Adams, that sort of thing. But the most common place where we see this happening is in newspapers. And one of Jefferson's closest friends is a newspaper man by the name of James Callender. And so he was one of the people that was arrested under the Alien and Sedition Acts. So again, Aaron Burr and Jefferson are tied. Adams comes in third, so it's going to go to the House of Representatives. And again, they tie. And so it really comes down to Alexander Hamilton. So even though he's not involved here, people are still gravitating to him for his educated opinion. And by this point, he and Aaron Burr are not getting along all that well. Hamilton sees him as a political opportunist. He's basically changing parties whenever it suits him. And so he is going to throw his weight or his support behind Thomas Jefferson, and the people in the House trust Alexander Hamilton. So this is going to give Thomas Jefferson the win. Aaron Burr becomes vice president. Now, at this point, Thomas Jefferson really assumes that Aaron Burr would step down or step aside, and then he could put James Madison in his place, but that is not what Aaron Burr decides to do. So this is going to be a big reason why we have the 12th Amendment today. So again, this is really the beginning of the end for the relationship between Burr and Hamilton. This is going to set the stage for the duel that will kill Hamilton, although it's not this particular election that actually does that. So it's a few years later in 1804. And so we had seen these political attacks against Burr. So this is what Hamilton is doing. He's writing just these awful editorials about Aaron Burr. This was going back to 1796. So Burr had run against John Adams. John Adams, of course, won that election. He's going to run for the governor of New York as a Federalist in 1804. Hamilton is relentless. He's going after him. He is going for the jugular. And so this is the real reason for the duel. It wasn't about the election of 1800. It was really about the election of 1804 for the New York governor spot. So Burr challenges him to, they wouldn't necessarily call it a duel. They would call it an affair of honor. And this was very normal for people that were considered gentlemen as a way to solve their disagreements. It was quite rare for someone to actually die in a duel like this, partially because the weapons they used are notoriously inefficient. So they decide to meet at 7 a.m. at Weehawken in New Jersey. At 7 a.m., this is the same spot and with the same weapon that kills Alexander Hamilton's son in a duel previously. Again, few duels ended in death. So when people find out that Aaron Burr has killed Alexander Hamilton, they are horrified, they are outraged. And this is, of course, going to be really the end of Aaron Burr's career. Keep in mind that he is still in the vice presidency at this point. So he stays in office to escape prosecution. And he'll spend a lot of years after that really kind of on the run. Okay, so this is just kind of for fun. I wanted to share this with you. This was a Got Milk commercial that won many awards in the early 90s. And it's important to note that in the early 90s, really the only people who knew who Aaron Burr were history nerds. So it's not like today where everyone seems to know who Aaron Burr is as a result of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton musicals. So keep that in mind. So suspend belief a little bit, but go ahead and enjoy this.
And that was the Vienna Wood Dance in D, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? All right, let's go to the phones and see who's out there.
Hello, for $10,000. Who shot... Excuse me? I'm afraid your time is almost up. I'm sorry. Maybe next time.
Okay, there you go. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Fun little Got Milk commercial there. So that poor guy. For my Hamilton musical fans, I wanted to let you know if you wanted to have an excuse to listen to a few more Hamilton songs, these are the ones that would be on this time period of the Jefferson and the Madison administration. So obviously the election of 1800, I highly recommend that one. It really shows a lot about the campaigning processes and that sort of thing. So feel free to listen to those if you feel so inclined. All right, so like I mentioned, the election of 1800 leads to some changes, and we have a constitutional change. We have a new amendment. So this is the 12th Amendment, which now says that each elector in the Electoral College would cast 1 vote for president and 1 for VP, not 2 for president as they had done previously. If there is no majority, the House would choose the president and the Senate would choose the VP. Now here there is a potential. This has never happened, but they could potentially choose a president from one party and a VP from another. But as they know, that would not be a recipe for stability. It doesn't happen. But if there's still no majority, it goes to the Supreme Court, like we saw with Bush v. Gore in 2000. All right, so how does Jefferson end up in the presidency? We would really be remiss if we didn't spend some time talking about his relationship with slavery. So even though he is this wonderful author about equality and democracy, it's important to note that he's able to enjoy his lavish lifestyle at Monticello because of the sale of slaves. So he's pretty regularly engaging in the slave trade. So that's important to note. Of course, his relationship with Sally Heming has been well documented by this point. So this is really going to be setting us up for the ultimate assignment you're going to be doing, which is showing the 2 faces of Jefferson, because he is just a walking contradiction in so many ways. And so you're going to be exploring that on a few different topics. He is the quintessential Renaissance man of this time period. He does it all. He's an inventor, he's a philosopher, he's an author, he's a diplomat, you name it. So he was the designer of the University of Virginia and of Monticello, of course. So he's got his hands in a lot of things here. He's a valued statesman. He has all different kinds of roles at different political levels. He definitely becomes a household name when he becomes the Secretary of State for George Washington. Has a lot of experience on the international front while he was a minister to France, and of course as vice president for John Adams. And of course his authorship of the Declaration of Independence. And in his inaugural address when he is elected, he says, "Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." So a really powerful and unifying message after such a nasty election. And this was definitely what the American people needed to hear, that he was going to be a president for all Americans going forward. And again, this is important because this is our first transfer of the presidency between parties. And it's impressive to note that it is peaceful, it is bloodless, and that is certainly not things that you could say about other nations as they transition from one party to another. So that is a really important distinction for American style democracy. Okay, so his vision is an agrarian republic. That is his dream of kind of these small yeoman farmers, so small family farms all over. He sees that as the most democratic way to operate. He wants to see room for us to expand. He's going to get his wish when he gets to the Louisiana Purchase. He wants a small federal government, small military, and reduced taxes, especially Federalist passed taxes. So what does he actually do? He cleans house when he gets in. He's going to repeal the whiskey tax and every other Federalist tax except for the protective tariff. He's going to repeal the Alien and Sedition Acts. He's going to pay off part of the national debt, which is really important. He's going to shrink the size of the military, but then pretty quickly realizes that he needs a bigger military. That's one of the events you're going to be digging into with your Jefferson assignment, specifically with the Barbary Pirates. Foreign affairs are going to be a thorn in his side for a bit. It's really going to get in the way of some of his domestic priorities. He is going to engage in both strict and loose constructions. Remember, this is how you interpret the Constitution. And so he comes in as a strict constructionist, but then ends up finding out he needs a little wiggle room with that as he goes through it. Reminder that Supreme Court issues are going on. Definitely make sure you review the Midnight Judges, the Marshall Court. that you saw a couple weeks ago. So definitely review that. All right, so the big question, how Jeffersonian was Thomas Jefferson as president? So that is the question that we are going to be trying to answer. So always some fun memes with Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase. So this happens in 1803. Please, please, please memorize that date. It will be your best friend when you're sitting down to LEQs and SAQs. So this is going to double the size of the United States. So this is huge. He really only wanted New Orleans, so actual Louisiana, but he's negotiating with Napoleon, and Napoleon is just like, why don't you just take the whole thing? And Thomas Jefferson is like, well, okay. Again, this is going to be an example of loose construction. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that we can buy land from foreign nations. So this is an example of loose construction. This is when he sends Lewis and Clark on their expedition just to kind of survey and see what we got with this land deal. He loves this idea. Louisiana is going to enable more farmers. Again, that's his dream. This is also going to enable the entrenchment of slavery, especially in those southern regions of Louisiana. This is obviously going to be an issue going forward for the next couple of units. Embargo Act, this is going to be an event you're going to dig into with your assignment as well, but I wanted to go over this one because it can cause some confusion. So I want to make sure that you really understand this one. So you'll get a couple different passes on this one. So this is dealing with impressment. So we're still dealing with this from Great Britain and France. So they're boarding our ships and they are abducting Americans and impressing them into their navies because they're just constantly at war with each other. And so he's going to pass something called the Embargo Act, which is an economic response to this. It's not a military one, to his credit. He thinks that we're going to shut our borders in terms of trade, and it is going to bring these powerhouse nations to their knees. That is definitely not what happens. And so he closes all American ports to exports, and it's going to restrict imports coming from Great Britain as well. Well, if you stop and think about this for a minute, you know that this is not going to be a very popular move, especially since we are at a point where we're still depending on Britain and France for a lot of finished products. We don't have this manufacturing is not quite at a level where we need it to be yet. That's not going to happen until after the War of 1812. So it hurts American shipping in a major way. We'll see some smuggling on the rise to get around it. Great Britain honestly doesn't really notice a difference. They're such a powerhouse in terms of their economy. They don't really need our trade. So this is going to really backfire for Thomas Jefferson. For someone who doesn't want to see the Hamiltonian dream of manufacturing and factories and all of that, this is a failure for him. So this is going to wake a lot of Americans up to the fact that we need to be producing our own finished goods. So stay tuned for Henry Clay and his American system. So that's what that is going to be all about. There'll be an asynchronous lesson on that coming up. All right, so we want to do some document analysis here. So this is a cartoon about the Embargo Act. It is almost always on the AP test. That's why we want to spend time with this one. Okay, so go ahead and take this in. Take, I'd say, 30 seconds to a minute and just take in the image and see if you can figure out what's going on. If you're having trouble reading the text, it says, damn it, how he nicks him. Oh, this cursed, oh, grab me. Go ahead and pause the video, see if you can figure out what is going on in this image. Okay, so one of the key points here is we've got the snapping turtle here. So that is oh grab me. Oh grab me is embargo backwards. So that's kind of a tricky piece of this. So this turtle is the American government or the embargo, and it is keeping this person from trading. So you can see the British ship in the water there, and so he is not letting him go. The turtle is also standing on a license to ship, so he's not letting him ship there. If you're wondering what he's trying to ship there, the bottom of the barrel says super fine, which is a form of sugar. So that's what they're utilizing there. So again, this is on the AP test all the time. So just wanted to make sure that you understood what was going on in the image here. More fun memes. There's so many Jefferson memes, but this really kind of sums up his philosophy that if there are no Americans at sea, then they can't be abducted and impressed into the British Navy. So the effects of the Embargo Act, Congress will rescind it 2 years later. It's horribly unpopular. And so we're going to start our trade again, and we are going to send out a bill called the Non-Intercourse Act, which says that we will resume trade with all countries except France and Britain. A little bit later down the line, we are going to have Makin's Bill number 2 that will deal with some of this as well. Basically, what we're going to say is, okay, Britain and France, we are going to trade with one of you and only one of you. And so whoever is the first to reply to this bill, you will be the one. So kind of a bad faith decision there. You're going to see a rise of unemployment because the shipping has shut down. So especially in our northeastern states. But again, it is going to be the wake-up call for Henry Clay and our American system. Jefferson will opt not to run for a third term, so Washington's precedent is still standing strong. He is going to handpick James Madison to take over for him. Obviously, he has to run and win, but he has picked him as his successor. It's a fellow JDR and a Virginian. Remember, he had originally been a Federalist and then switches parties. And there will be a separate video on the Janus project assignment, so stay tuned for that.